Good evening, and thank you for joining Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan's virtual town hall tonight. My name is Mike Anderson, and I'll be your moderator. Now, in just a few moments, I'll turn it over to the senators for some very brief opening remarks before this evening's town hall. But before I do, I'd like to take a few moments to let everyone know that if you'd like to ask a question tonight, please press *3 at any time, and you'll be connected with a call operator. Again, if you'd like the opportunity to ask a question this evening, please press *3 to enter the queue. With that, we'll turn it over to Senator Murkowski.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you to everyone who's joined us on the line this evening. We appreciate the opportunity as your Alaska delegation in the Senate to be hearing from you, sharing some of the updates from Washington, D.C. Obviously, there is a lot going on right now. Back home in Alaska, we are working to reopen in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And reopen in a way that prioritizes health and safety. I think that as a state, we have demonstrated a focus as Alaskans that recognizes that we may be a little bit further at the end of the line. The resources may be a little more challenged at times, and so how we are resourceful ourselves, how we work together to respect the protocols that have been laid out there, how we've been following the advisories. I think we have truly made a difference in addressing the curve. I know that we're seeing some spikes right now as we're seeing additional movement coming in with summer coming on and just people moving around more readily. But I still feel that we have taken strong and measured steps to respond in a way that really does prioritize the health and safety. So let me thank everyone, all Alaskans, who have worked to mitigate the outbreak and to support one another through this time. I think that the governor and his team, I've commended Dr. Zink on numerous occasions, and the folks in Governor Dunleavy's administration who have worked through some challenging issues and made some difficult decisions. But we're in a better place, I think, because of this. But as we're dealing with the health impacts that are related to the COVID, we know that we're also dealing with an economy, a state's economy that's really been kicked hard as we had to literally shutter so many businesses and really Alaska's economy, everything from tourism to seafood to our oil and gas sector has just been hit so hard. But we have done so in an effort to ensure that we are addressing the health safety concerns. And then now across the nation, people are gathering to speak out, to allow their voices to be heard as they plea for calls for justice and demands for equality. In Alaska, we have seen our own peaceful assemblies as individuals have come together to speak out about things that matter, and in doing so in a way that brings people together. I think we all condemn the violence that we are seeing, the looting, but I think we also recognize that we have some deeper issues as a nation that we must address, and we must do so in a way that commands the highest respect as we deal with the uncertainties and the tension that our nation is now facing. So our Teletown Hall tonight, again, a good opportunity to hear from you as well as to provide some updates on what's happening at the federal level. What we've been doing in these past 11 now town halls is giving you the quick COVID relief updates. We're back in session here in the Senate and continuing to address the COVID relief efforts. Just this morning, we had a hearing in the Health Education Committee on how we can safely return to our colleges and universities, our job training programs. The Senate just yesterday passed a bill to give our small business owners more flexibility in how they spend the Paycheck Protection Program loans. You've heard a lot on these town halls from Senator Sullivan and myself over the past several months here now about the PPP, and we have attempted to refine it with your input. But what was passed last evening would extend an 8-week period when the proceeds have to be spent for these loans to be forgiven. We've extended that to 24 weeks or until the end of the year, whichever comes first. Businesses would also have as long as 5 years instead of 2 to repay any money owed on the loan. And they could use a greater percentage of proceeds on rent and other approved non-payroll expenses. We heard so much, particularly from those in the restaurant and the hospitality industries, saying that they needed more time to be able to distribute this. So we think that this was very, very important. Senator Sullivan, I want to acknowledge his efforts on this because he's been really dogged in making sure that we were able to advance this before the next iteration of a CARES bill. In the state, we've been working hard to expand testing capacity. There have been, as of the 2nd of June, the state has conducted 58,182 tests. State health officials today told us that over the last 7 days rolling, we've done about 12,000 tests. We are consistently in the top 10 states for testing per capita. Today, we're at 8th in the country. And I think that that's important because when we talk about getting safely back to work, safely back to school, I think testing is going to be one of the ways that we give that level of assurance. So we're moving forward aggressively with these efforts. Outside of the COVID issues, next week, the Senate is going to be turning to a bill that has come out of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, which I chair. This is called the Great American Outdoors Act, which effectively ensures that we are caring not only for our national parks, but also our public lands when it comes to maintenance, backlog, deferred maintenance, but establishing a legacy restoration fund addressing deferred maintenance backlogs on land management agencies. So this is something that we certainly know in Alaska, the value of our parks and our public lands, but we also know that when we fail to keep them up, as we see in Denali, for instance, with the road that goes into Denali National Park, and the deterioration of the road, which is a threat not only to our tourists as they're coming to experience incredible majesty in Alaska, but also a recognition that when we fail to do the upkeep, that doesn't go away. It's not going to correct itself over the winter season. It just gets worse. So making sure that we are addressing these problems, I think, is important. And particularly as we're thinking about measures that will allow for jobs going forward as we look to address our state's economy. When you think about roads and road maintenance and deferred maintenance, that's not only federal dollars that come Alaska's way, but that's also jobs that help with infrastructure. I know that Dan will have comments here this evening about the measures that he's been working on with an infrastructure bill and a water resources bill that can also speak to the significance of infrastructure and how we can move out of this recovery effort that we are just now beginning and moving back to an economy that we can all have comfort with. So with that, I turn it over to my friend and colleague, Senator Sullivan.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and I want to thank you for your great work and all of us working well together with Congressman Young. I think it's an important element of what I've been referring to as the one team, one fight approach to addressing the pandemic, whether it's us working together with the governor and his team or our elected leaders in the state or the Trump administration and their team. I think that people working together on this really unprecedented challenge that we have in our state and our country is really, really important. So I want to thank my friend and colleague, Senator Murkowski, for all the work she's doing. Obviously, we're facing big challenges still, and I want to thank everybody on the town hall tonight. I think one of the things that we wanted to do was provide updates and hear from all of you, but one of the things that I think it's important to recognize when you start to have updates that are showing some progress. A number of our Teletown Halls, we've heard from many of you, and I'm sure we will tonight, of the frustration that we've seen, and we share it too, on the CARES Act, how it's been implemented, the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, 5 weeks ago, couldn't seemingly get off the ground, particularly in our state, and there have been some updates, and I think some progress. We're certainly not all the way there yet, but on a couple of important issues, I'll just reiterate a few. What Senator Murkowski mentioned on the PPP program, because of town halls like this, we heard from Alaskan small businesses, particularly our seasonal businesses, and about a month ago pressed the Treasury to issue regulations that would enable seasonal businesses to base their PPP loan on the number of employees they had last summer, not in March or April when the program was first stood up of this year. We think that helped to some degree with regard to our seasonal small businesses, which are obviously going to face a lot of challenges this summer given the sharp decline in tourism. The next issue we heard, and I was home for the last 10 days and heard it in almost every call, was the issue of the loan forgiveness. And Senator Murkowski already talked about it, but it was initially 8 weeks, and that's the idea that if you use the PPP in a certain way, particularly as it relates to paying employees on your payroll and then other qualified expenses, that in the first 8 weeks of that loan, if you use it that way, the loan would be turned into a grant. That was our estimate when we initially promulgated the CARES Act. 2 months. As all of you know, and I think became very clear, and we heard it loud and clear from so many of our fellow Alaskans, 2 months was not good enough. This pandemic's ramifications are way beyond that. And so I'm sure it's the same with Lisa, but when I was home for the last 10 days, this is the number one issue I heard. So we were really pleased to be able to actually get this passed into law last night, working closely with the House on a new, essentially PPP program that's going to increase the loan forgiveness period to 24 weeks from 8. We think that's going to really, hopefully, help our seasonal businesses that are particularly challenged. It's going to change the percentage of payroll requirement for forgiveness, which is what we also heard from many of you, from 75% to 60%. And importantly, it's going to increase the loan payment period. So remember, these are 1% interest loans. Once you get beyond the forgiveness period, it was a 2-year loan. The bill that we passed last night in the Senate makes that a 5-year loan. And it also fixes this payroll tax deferral issue that many of you raised. So, again, not a perfect fix, but this is literally what so many of our small businesses in the seasonal business and tourism had requested, and I'm glad we were able to get that fixed quickly, and we're hopeful that the President's going to sign this in the next couple days. I won't go into all the work we've been doing on the energy sector. We still are very, very challenged, there's no doubt. But if you remember, 6 weeks ago we did a Teletown Hall, where the price of oil had remarkably, I don't even understand how this happens, dipped below zero. I think some of the oil price indicators yesterday and today hit close to 40. That's still not great, but it's a heck of a lot better than negative numbers. So that's an area that we've all been working on. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, not sure it's going to happen, but it's something I've been pressing on, and I know most Alaskans really care about it. On the Environment and Public Works Committee, we passed out a Ports and Harbor bill, the WRDA bill. We're going to combine that with the highway bill that was already passed. These are important infrastructure packages. By the way, on the committee, they passed 21-0, totally bipartisan legislation, because everybody recognizes how important infrastructure is, particularly to turbocharge our economy as we're trying to get out of this recession from the pandemic. We're looking at possibly combine that with a broadband infrastructure bill and hopefully move that sometime in July. The good news on that, and Congressman Young isn't on the call, but the House finally did introduce their own version of the highway bill. It's not exactly what I would have introduced, but it's a good start, and of course having them working on the highway bill is going to be critical as we work on it as well. And then finally, I mentioned the PPP. A couple, 5 or 6 weeks ago, the EIDL loan program in our state was essentially stalled. I really want to appreciate Senator Murkowski's hard work on essentially pressing the SBA, saying, hey, what the heck, how can we have these low value loan numbers in our state when other states are doing a lot better. As of May 23rd, we've improved dramatically. There's been about 1,100 loans under the EIDL program, valued at close to $86 million, with over 7,500 advances to businesses valued at $25 million. There is still $120 billion left in the PPP program, so if you're a small business leader, and the flexibility and particularly the extension of the 24-week loan forgiveness period, which is now going to be signed into law, it's a good opportunity to take advantage of this. These changes that we passed in the Senate last night might make this fund start to be very popular again. So we would highly recommend, if you're interested, to work with our credit unions, community banks that have done such a good job on getting these loans out quickly. We're going to mark up the National Defense Authorization Act next week. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. We've had a really good run in terms of military construction in our state. In the last about 3.5, 4 years, the delegation has secured about $1.5 billion in military construction. I'm confident that this NDAA will continue that trend. There's probably close to about $200 million slated for investments in infrastructure in Alaska. That's great for our national defense because we're so strategically located, but it's also really good for our economy and jobs, and we're going to continue to press on that. And then finally, I would also like to mention what Senator Murkowski talked about in terms of the heinous murder that we saw in Minnesota of George Floyd that has sparked protests all over our great nation, including in our state. I've put a number of posts out on that. I won't go into all that I've said, but of course we all need to condemn in the strongest terms racism, which is still, of course, unfortunately we have in our country. And I did put out a post tonight. It was an op-ed by my former boss and mentor and friend, Condoleezza Rice, who knows a lot about these issues. She wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post today, and to me it was one of the most moving and compelling pieces on how we should think about these issues and what we as Americans and Alaskans should do. So I would mention that just if you're interested in what a very fine person who understands these issues more than most feels about it. I put it on my Facebook page tonight, and would if you're interested, you should take a look. So thank you again, and we look forward to your questions and everybody joining again tonight.
All right, thanks, Senators. Once again, for any listeners looking to ask a question tonight, please press *3 to be placed into the queue. And with that, we're going to go to the phones, and first up is Philip in Sitka, who's got a question.
Thank you so much, Senators, for everything that you're doing. You're just absolutely doing a terrific job. And Senator Sullivan, thank you for calling me over the weekend. I'm just sorry we didn't get a chance to talk. I'm down here in Sitka, own Talon Lodge, and we've got a little private island. And the 60-40 change on the PPP program is wonderful, but the 40%, I'm having a hard time fitting a square box into a round hole. We don't have utility bills. We generate our own power. We do our own water processing. It's typical stuff that the lower 48 just doesn't have, but, a lot of businesses like ours, that's what we have. So I'm trying to figure out on that 40%, how can we broaden that into more operational costs that we have, which most businesses in the lower 48 don't have as well. Is there any idea on what that structure is going to look like and who's going to make those decisions?
So, Philip, I'll take a crack at that. And one of the things that we and thanks for mentioning. And I'm sorry I missed you. I think you talked to Renee on my team. One of the things that we have been trying to do is literally, your business is kind of the example that Senator Murkowski and I have been making the case on to our colleagues here on the seasonal fix that we, like I mentioned, that we got about a month ago, and then this extension on the 8 to 24 weeks, and then also on the 75 to 60. The qualifying expenses, and I don't have it exactly in front of me, but so I'm talking about the non-labor part. It's actually fairly broad, so it can include things not just mortgage and rent and utilities, but other issues that go into essentially running your business. And so my team and I can make sure that you get a detailed list of those, because obviously the one thing we're saying to all small businesses as you are going through the usage of the PPP, particularly as it relates to the forgiveness portion, is to keep very detailed records, because the Treasury regs and everything can be a bit opaque, and if you keep those detailed records, you're going to make sure that you'll be able to get full forgiveness after the 24-week period. So we can work with you on that, but as you can still see, even with this statutory change that we made last night in the Senate, the overriding goal of the PPP still is, it's certainly to keep our small businesses intact and afloat during these challenging times, but it's also still, it went from 75 to 60%, but still very much focused on making sure the businesses try to maintain their employees, even if the business demand isn't as high. Unfortunately, that's going to be the case for a number of our small businesses. But we can give you more of the details offline after this. We have your contact info, and thanks for calling in, not just to this Teletown Hall, but the previous one that I was following up with you on over the weekend.
Yeah, Philip, let me just add one quick thing, because I think that Dan has really outlined the situation well. But this is an issue that we did acknowledge as an impediment, whether it's so many of our Alaska businesses or otherwise. But as it relates to your ability to receive any loan forgiveness, it was actually Senator Collins and Senator Rubio as the two that were working this as a small business committee chairman, and Senator Collins as the next senior there. They were worried that the bill could be interpreted as barring businesses from receiving any loan forgiveness if they spend less than 60% of the PPP funds on the payroll expenses. But under the current regs, business that doesn't meet the payroll threshold can still receive partial forgiveness. So this is something that the SBA and Treasury may clarify this provision through some additional rulemaking or some guidance. It may be that another measure is actually passed with regards to the 60% rule, but know that this is something that has been identified as is really not working for certain businesses, and what you have described with your lodge there in Sitka, it clearly fits that. But I think it is important to recognize that even if you don't make that 60-40 split, there is, under the current regs, you can still receive partial forgiveness. Again, the purpose here is to try to allow for full forgiveness, and thus we were trying to make this division here a little more equitable, I think, and in keeping with more of certainly Alaska's small businesses.
All right, thank you, Senators. Next up, we're going to go to Chris in Ketchikan, who's got a question.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you both for everything you've done for us here for the small businesses in Southeast Alaska. Can't overstate how awesome it is to hear you guys talk on a call and then in a couple of weeks see it implemented. But I did want to address my question. The state of Alaska received about $1 billion in additional funding from the CARES Act, and after it got filtered through the legislature, there was quite a bit added to small businesses. But they added a critique in there where they said if you got PPP money or EIDL money, you aren't eligible. So I want to know what the senators are going to do to help us address that.
So, Chris, let me take that one because and sorry, I don't want to jump in front of Lisa here, but
no, go ahead, you got it.
We've been hearing a lot on this one, and as a matter of fact, we're on a call. The two of us were on a call with the leadership in the Mat-Su Borough, and this came up again, and a couple of our constituents have reached out to us. So there's a little bit of confusion, and look, I know for a fact that the CARES Act has had implementation issues, challenges, the flexibility of boroughs and municipalities to use the money, the $1.3 billion that came from the CARES Act to the states and now going to all of our different political subdivisions throughout the state. There's some challenges with the CARES Act that it puts on that use of that money, but when it comes to the use of money that has gone to small businesses, there's nothing in the CARES Act that prohibits a small business using or accessing a state program. So we've checked this, double-checked this. So, and look, we work very closely with our state elected leaders and our governor and state senators and state reps, but that was a restriction that I believe came out of Juneau, not out of D.C. So if they get rid of that and you're a small business, then if you had an EIDL loan or PPP loan, you could access the state small business grant program. But that is a challenge that the that's a prohibition that I believe our state elected leaders put in place. That's not part of the CARES Act.
Yeah, and Chris, again, just very quickly, as Dan has outlined, there's nothing in CARES that would provide for these limitations. This is through the state. You can kind of see though where they're coming from. When we first passed the CARES Act and the PPP was rolled out and the EIDL as these loan and grant opportunities, we all saw, I mean, literally the run on the bank. People rushed to try to avail themselves of these programs because they weren't sure. Was there going to be another round? Was there going to be any assistance from the state? And we've heard, you've told us, we've seen, we've had these conversations one-on-one with Alaskans all around the state. People were panicked, are panicked about the state of their businesses. And so the need to be able to access funds quickly. And so I can see where the state said, well, if you've had an opportunity to tap into the federal programs, we want to make sure that those who didn't have an opportunity at the state level. But I think that what we're seeing is that the federal programs, as helpful as PPP and EIDL are, have not been sufficient in many cases, or the parameters, as we just visited with Philip on the parameters that we have in the federal guidance and the regulations just don't work for our businesses. And so it would be great if there could be a way that we could synchronize. But right now, as I understand, in order for there to be a change with the Small Business Relief Fund through the state, it would require a change in language through force of law there through this revised program legislative, this RPL. So I do think it is important that we recognize that there are multiple sources of funding that are available. Again, we all wish that there could be better alignment here, but right now that limitation is a state consideration.
All right, thank you. Next up, we're going to go to Audrey in Anchorage. She's got a question.
Hi. Thank you, Senators. My question is about extending the federal unemployment, the extra unemployment. We have a lot of hospitality workers up here that are not getting called back to work even though things are opening up, and they probably won't until at least probably after this year. So I wanted to know what your thoughts were about extending that unemployment.
Well, let me take the first crack at that, Audrey. Thank you. Yes, we have seen unprecedented levels of those who have sought unemployment benefits. Absolutely unprecedented in this state and really in states across the country. I think what you're going to see here in these next several weeks, the Congress, certainly the Senate, is going to be assuming the oversight role that I think is important when we put in place relief measures as we have with the CARES bill, $2 trillion plus in federal resources going out from everything from direct assistance to unemployment to small business loans to Main Street loans. We need to make sure, again, that these programs we have put in place are getting to the need and in ways that again are responsive. So when we talk about the need for extending unemployment, I think it's going to be important to look at the various state unemployment insurance funds. I think it is also important to recognize that we have an extended duration for unemployment, depending on criteria. Unemployment in Alaska the unemployment benefits, in Alaska may last longer and without action, because we have met a threshold within the unemployment laws. Two more points to add. The extra payment of the $600 that came on top of the state unemployment insurance is being looked at very critically. We know that has provided great benefit to many who were desperately in need. We also know and have heard oftentimes on these calls that we hear from employers who say, I have tried to reopen my establishment. I've gone back to those who I had to lay off, but they tell me that they can actually make more on the plussed up unemployment than they can coming back to work for me. And so that has actually acted as a disincentive. I think it's important that we review that. The last point that I will make, though, is that with the pandemic unemployment, we added an additional category. Those who are gig workers, those who are sole proprietors, independent contractors, eligible for unemployment insurance where they previously had not been through the state UI. And we certainly hear from so many who are saying, and many of these are, again, seasonal. They have seasonal businesses. And for these folks, these unemployment, this expansion of unemployment has been significant for them. So I recognize how important that benefit has been. So this will be part of this discussion that we have going forward. And again, a couple things going on: extra payment, addition of a classification of those who have been impacted, as well as extended duration unemployment in Alaska because of our higher unemployment rates even prior to COVID.
So Audrey, the only thing I'll add to Lisa's comment is the discussions are ongoing right now in the Congress that try to balance the two issues that she just highlighted, which is to extend benefits because, unfortunately for our state and our country, we're not going to be, out of this recession anytime in the next couple months. But to do so in a way that doesn't disincentivize individuals from going back to work. And there's a lot of ideas right now. There's a return to work bonus idea that Senator Portman has been talking about and pitching to a number of us. But I think that's kind of the balance that we're looking at to answer your question, to help the people who need it. And there's, unfortunately, in our state and country, a lot of people who need it. But to also not have the situation, which we have been hearing about, to be honest, quite a lot, that there's a disincentive to go back to the job you may have had previously because of the levels of the CARES Act unemployment insurance. So that's where all the action is right now, and the current program expires on July 31st.
Thank you, Senators. Next up, we're going to go to Daniel in Anchorage. He's got a question.
Hey, Daniel Voland here, calling from Anchorage. Hi, Senators. I wanted to say, Lisa, I really appreciated your comments on the floor this afternoon regarding racial equality and civil rights. I thought it was very heartfelt, meaningful. I attended the peaceful rally that you mentioned in Anchorage, and I plan on attending the rally on Saturday in Palmer, which I hope will also be peaceful. However, like many, I've been dismayed at what I've seen happening to protesters in other cities like Seattle, D.C., Minneapolis. My question is, what can be done on a federal level to increase accountability for police officers when civil rights are violated?
Well, Daniel, thank you. Thank you for your thoughtful question. Thank you for using your voice in a peaceful way, in a constructive way, and hopefully a unifying way to address what we see continues in our country, and a recognition that when we speak about equal rights, that there are many for whom they don't feel that they see that equality in the way that they are being treated, and when someone's rights are violated, to ensure that there is a fair justice. And you ask about legislation. I do think that what we have in discussions underway, I don't sit on the Committee of Jurisdiction on Judiciary, but I know that there has been a great deal of discussion in this past week about reining in qualified immunity. I do know that there has been specific discussion about very targeted legislation that would be directed to the type of harm that is perpetrated. And I think, in fairness to your question, these are matters, and again, bills that are being drafted now as members are coming together to address what we have seen, but recognizing that this is not just a response to the death of George Floyd, but that it is broader and it is deeper, and how we can ensure that violations are recognized and addressed effectively and appropriately. I do think that the efforts that have been underway in probably, I don't know, maybe the past 5 years, the efforts that we have made to move forward on criminal justice reform, I think that these have been positive. I think that they have been steps forward in the right direction. But I acknowledge that there is more that we can and we should be doing, working together. So thank you for that, and know that my prayers this weekend is that the assemblies, whether in Alaska or around the country, are peaceful.
So Daniel, thanks, and I'll just add a little bit to what Lisa said. There's a lot of thought and, as you can imagine, as she mentioned, discussion that's been going on in the Senate on these issues. I think everybody agrees that the peaceful protests that I'm sure you're going to be part of this weekend, particularly against such heinous acts like we saw with the killing of Mr. Floyd and some of the other acts that we've seen, unfortunately, recently, that are just examples of existing racism in our country. Our protesting against that represents the best of the American spirit, and it's important to keep those protests peaceful. The balance, of course, is always the key issue. You do not want police brutalizing protesters, that's for sure. But you also don't want protesters getting so out of hand that they start targeting the police. One of the numbers I saw, I don't know if it's true, but over 50 members of the Secret Service were injured a couple nights ago at some of the protests in front of the White House. Again, I'm not sure if that's an accurate number, but I read that somewhere. So obviously that's the kind of balance because, as I'm sure you know, the vast majority of our police officers in Alaska and National Guardsmen are great public servants doing a fine job. It's usually the very fringe on both sides that are doing the work that the vast majority of us don't agree with in terms of violence, whether it's from a police officer or from a protester. So that's the key. One of the bills that I know my colleague, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, who you may have seen has been a real articulate leader in the discussion of these issues nationally for our country, is talking about is just starting to initially get data on what are the numbers that exist nationwide with regard of some of the actions that you're talking about. And I think that's, believe it or not, we evidently don't even have a national database on that. And I think that's a really important way to start to get a handle on what clearly continues to be a challenge for all of us. And so that would be just an overview on some of the issues that we're looking at, but I'm sure there's going to be obviously a lot more discussion on these issues, on what we can do and what people can do individually. That's the essence of the op-ed I mentioned at the top of my remarks by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. And again, I would mention, if people are interested, to take a look at that very powerful piece that she wrote today.
Okay, next up we're going to go to Grace in Fairbanks.
Hello. Thank you. Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Grace.
Okay. Thank you for taking my call. I am a retired lady, and I am not affected, as most poor people are here, about businesses and everything on there, so I have tried to stay away from getting assistance and everything, just kind of letting the people who really need the assistance get it. My problem is that my income tax that I filed back in February has been on hold for 90 days now, or actually more than 90 days, and every time I go into the website, it is payment refund in progress. And I understand the situation with COVID-19, and I stayed back and thought, okay, I can hold here getting firewood and filling up my tanks. I can wait. And so 1 month went, 2 months went, 3 months went. I'm on more than 3 months now, 90 days. That money is not a whole lot for most people, but it's a lot for me. It helps me fill out my fuel tanks and get firewood for the winter to come. I'm at a loss to where I go. H&R Block can't help me because they can't get anybody to answer. I call Social Security. They say COVID-19, nobody can help me. I go online and they say, your payment is in progress. We will let you know. It's over 90 days. Can I get help from anybody? Is there any way I can get this money that is due to me without interfering in the big issues that are happening, which are very important, but help?
Well, Grace, you remind us all that while there is so much immediacy to the COVID response, the rest of the functioning of government is still expected to move through as well, whether it is getting your IRS refund or your Social Security, or just being able to get a permit from Park Service. We expect the government to be moving forward, and it has been challenging as so many of our governmental functions have been put on telework status. It has been a challenge, but that's still not an excuse it is part of what we're dealing with right now. What I would offer to you, and I know that Senator Sullivan will as well, we've got pretty extraordinary staff in Alaska and in Washington, D.C. I have my head of constituent services, Sherry Edwards, has, I think, probably a direct line into the IRS taxpayer services, and we can at least help to identify where in the line your refund might be. But these are the types of things. Oftentimes, people don't think about their senators and their congressmen in the role of the constituent services category. But more often than not, what it is, I mean, yes, we pass legislation and work on these substantive issues, but we also try to help interface the constituent with our federal agencies and getting answers to questions like, where is my IRS refund? We can help you with that. So I would send you to 271-3735 in Anchorage. I would give you the Fairbanks number, but I don't know it off the top of my head, but Trina in Fairbanks could also help you there as well. So we'll help you.
Yep, Grace, I will just add to that quickly. That's a big part of our job. I always like to say it's, obviously crafting the legislation and working to implement it and hearing back from all of our fellow Alaskans, hey, you need to tweak this or fix that. We've been doing a lot of that. But then there's also the individual casework, and we want to encourage you and literally everybody else on the line. It's a huge part of our job. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, we have a great team. By the way, since the pandemic broke out, they're literally working 24/7 weekends. And so I'll just throw you our number as well, 271-5915. And as I always like to say, can't promise the result you want, but I can promise that our team will work its tail off to try to get there. And the Fairbanks number is 456-0261.
All right, thank you, Senators. Next up, we're going to go to Eric in Wasilla, who's got a question.
Hi there. My question and comment will take about a minute. I've written it down here. So, being left out of the business-oriented financial response to this pandemic, I hear I'm far from alone, yet the total void of a response to this leaves me now within 3 weeks of homelessness and no way to avoid it. Myself and other at-risk persons watched the premature opening with alarm and cannot feel safe going back to work with insufficient testing, insufficient contact tracing, lack of security at points of entry to the state, and a prevailing attitude of abandonment here. And the fact is, I'm one of those who would probably be dead in 3 days if I catch COVID. So I do not take kindly to being pushed into a hazard by folks whose highest aspiration seems to be complacency. Now, thank you very much, Senator Murkowski, for your work, but with respect, your quest for accountability about the CARES Act is a cruel falsehood, I think, because the act was designed with unaccountability built in to slow down the help we need. And I don't see the same concern for disaster capitalists and big businesses. So, and then there's a personal concern, which is really coming after me, which is that I have not been able to file for UI for 8 weeks. Then when I did, there's a lag before I'm able to get anything. So I'm in trouble, and we need the more concerted response. So that's the end of my comment. Thanks.
Well, Eric, I'm not sure why you're saying there is a lag in the UI. I'll take the easy part of your question first. Now, I do know that the way the state UI had set up the program, if you fell into the expanded category, they effectively would have to reject you from state UI first before they would accept you for the other. But there should not be a lag. So that is something that we may want to be able to help track down with you. We've had some really strong discussions with the head of the Unemployment Insurance Division there, Patsy Westcott, and who's been very, very helpful, and we can try that. You are correct in that so much of the focus of what we had in the CARES Act was focused on ensuring that employers were able to keep employees on unemployment insurance benefits, but we did attempt, and again, I just say attempt, to address some of the vulnerability of individuals through the direct assistance. I realize that was a one-time payment to individuals through the CARES Act, but I do think that it is important to recognize that what we have put in place to support the safety nets that are out there to ensure that people do not become homeless. These have been a significant part of the CARES Act. And while you might not see them directly in terms of a payment to you, the services that are there, whether they are the food for food security, so that those who do not have the resources to buy the food are able to gain food, for those who do not have the resources for the medical care or the testing, that is available to them without cost, to ensure we don't want you to become homeless, but that is another issue that I have been spending a great deal of time on, because I'm very concerned about those who are homeless, are young people who are homeless or not necessarily defined as homeless, but for all intents and purposes they are so, and who again have been left out of the supports, direct supports through the CARES Act. So I do know that the support for the services who are, for those of you who are in this vulnerable category, whether through health conditions or economic conditions, that what we've been trying to put in place are not only appropriate levels of safeguards, but safeguards that will not let you drop through. So know that I take your question directly, and if we can have a one-on-one conversation to further discuss your situation, I am so happy to do that.
And Eric, I would just add, I think Senator Murkowski really articulated it well, but when we put the CARES Act together, of course, we were trying to anticipate things because we saw this giant pandemic coming, but of course nobody really had a crystal ball. So the whole idea was to take a broad brush approach at getting as many resources to as many Alaskans and fellow Americans as possible through as many channels. So that is, as Senator Murkowski mentioned, the individual payment checks to individuals and families, this significant increase in unemployment insurance. Yes, there is a significant amount to our small businesses, but also to our hospitals, community health centers, fishermen, schools, a huge amount to our tribes and tribal health care systems, the state of Alaska itself. So that was the goal. I don't think anyone thought that it was going to perfectly cover everybody, and that's something that, to be honest, a number of us were always concerned about, which is why I was constantly saying to the Senate, we need to be back in the Senate in session to figure out where people may have fallen through the cracks that weren't covered. So we're still trying to do that, and I hope your health is, being maintained throughout this challenging time. I will say the state, and it's been a combo of what we've been working with the feds on, but our state, if you look at some of the numbers on testing, again, it's not perfect. I had a brief just a couple days ago that, we might get up to 40 to 50 million tests per month as a nation by September, which would be good. But our state is actually per capita leading in some of the categories, or one of the top states in testing and contact tracing. I think a lot of the credit goes to the, Commissioner Crum and Dr. Zink and their team. Again, we're not perfect, but the latest number I saw just in the last couple of days, 12,000 people were tested in our state. That's a pretty good number, but we can always improve.
All right, thank you, Senators. And we're going to try to squeeze in one more quick question here. We're going to go to Len Oaks in Ketchikan.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Senator. This is in regards to the census. If you live rurally in Alaska, and this happened at the last census, when they do not mail out the census forms to post office boxes any longer, if you live rurally and you don't live on a road system, you're on a boat, or you live very rurally, when you call in the 2020 census number, which is a very good way to be counted, if you don't have a street and a house number, they can't continue to take your information. We have called in and repeatedly said, why can't you use a GPS address, which everybody has, or at least if you live rurally you do, or on a boat, it's very easy to do, in lieu of a street or a house address, but it doesn't seem like it gets through the call centers. A lot of times when you call into the call center and you mention you live rurally in Alaska, they say, well, this is a U.S. census, not a census for a foreign country. These call centers apparently are overseas somewhere, I guess. I don't know. But and that would be a solution for rural Alaskans that don't live on a road system to when they're asked for your street name and house number to say we don't have one, but we can give you a GPS address, and then that would put them into a census area. That would geocode them to where they're at, put them in a census area and in a unit. And what they want you to do now is just pick a city, and they will put you in that city, but you don't live there.
Well, so Lynn, I really appreciate you bringing this up, because we have, with all the focus on what's been going on with COVID, I think we've really lost some of the momentum that we began early in the year. The national census began in Alaska, in a rural northwestern village, and, to much fanfare. And by gosh, this time we were going to get it right. We were going to make sure that every Alaskan got counted, a pretty aggressive PR campaign. And to your point, recognizing that the rural areas are so difficult to count because you don't have things like the street address. And so knowing that we were going to have census workers on the ground and really utilizing some different tools in order to make sure we had an accurate count. I think we started off well, but I do think that the focus has and the momentum that we had begun, we've kind of lost a little bit of the steam. Now we did extend the census, so there is more time to complete that. But right now, our census response here in the state are really pretty low. I'm told that right now we're standing at a 41% response rate here in the state of Alaska. Nationally, right now, the national response is about 60.6%. In the Northwest Arctic area, they tell me that the response rate is 5.3%. In the Bethel area, the response rate is just 12%. This is significant because we rely on these census numbers for so much for these next 10 years for formula funding, from everything to health care dollars for our native peoples, to federal highway dollars, to housing. They did, again, I mentioned that they had reset this schedule for completion of the questionnaires until the end of October. But I do think that the issue that you have raised about the challenges that we face in parts of Alaska, rural Alaska, have caused us to be left shortchanged in the past. And so we knew that. We knew that going into this, and we said we're going to change it to make it better. But right now, we need to urge all Alaskans, if you have not completed your census questionnaire, please engage. You point out the challenges that we face in rural Alaska, but it's even more important out in rural Alaska, because we don't want those who live there to be overlooked, to not be counted. It is too important. So thank you for raising that. Know that we're all working on this one.
So Len, I would just add any ideas like the ones you have to make it more accurate and more convenient, timely, are welcome. So thanks for doing that. As a matter of fact, when Lisa was describing these low rates, we had some senior Commerce Department officials, and we're working with them right now, reach out to us and say, Alaska, come on, you're 20% lower than the U.S. average. We're the lowest of any state at that 41% that Senator Murkowski just mentioned. So we're looking at ways to be more innovative with the federal government, because in terms of the counting of the census, because as Lisa just mentioned, if we don't do it, we're only harming ourselves. As we're seeing with the CARES Act, in that issue I just mentioned about as many resources through as many channels as possible, most of those are done by a formula that is usually related to population. And if we're undercutting ourselves, we're going to have 10 years of lesser federal funding formulas for our state because we didn't get the correct number in. So there's still a lot of work to do. The pandemic put a pause on this, but I would encourage all Alaskans listening and to tell your friends and family members when you get the census form or you sign up online, if you have access to the internet, so important. So thank you for asking about this. This is really a public service announcement for everybody listening to fill out your census, because it's only going to help us. And it's mandated by the Constitution, if that helps too.
All right, well, that's all the time we have this evening. If you wanted to ask a question of the senators but you weren't able to, please hang on the line afterwards, and you'll be prompted to leave a message, and our offices will work to get you an answer. With that, have a great evening, stay safe, and good night.
Thanks, everyone.